You are listening to Lighthearted, the official podcast of the United States Lighthouse Society. My name is Jeremy D'Entremont. Welcome. Today is December 29th, 2024, and this is episode 305. My co-host today is Michelle Jewel Shaw, mom, teacher, and award-winning Lighthouse volunteer who has been an important part of this podcast from the very beginning. Hi, Michelle.
Hi, Jeremy, and hello to all of our listeners out there.
In a few minutes, we will return to Wisconsin for the third time in recent episodes for a discussion of the Kewaunee Pierhead Lighthouse. This is our final episode of 2024. People will hear this after Christmas, but we're actually recording just before Christmas. So I guess I should be the first to say that I hope you had a happy holiday, Michelle, if that makes any sense.
Yes, I hope you did as well, and I hope all of our listeners also had a wonderful holiday.
I hope you're getting a well-deserved break from teaching.
Well, not yet because today's officially my first day of break. So today is definitely a break, and hopefully I decide to not do too much work while I'm home over this break.
Well, as we get close to starting a new year, I was thinking about this past year and the things I got to do, some pretty awesome things. In May, I drove down the coast for, a week or so. As far as Maryland, visited lots of lighthouses, did some podcast interviews. I did a nighttime photo workshop in Maine with the photographer Pete Lero. I helped to lead a U.S. Lighthouse Society tour in Maine in October. We also celebrated the 300th episode of this podcast and also the 40th anniversary of the U.S. Lighthouse Society. We had a special event for that, among other things. So I think it was a pretty good year, and I feel very lucky to have had all these experiences. How about you, Michelle? What stands out for you about this past year?
I guess I got to make a couple of trips to Disney World this past year with my daughter, and that was really great. Watching progress being made on, trying to get some things fixed over at the lighthouse, that has kind of been a big part of the past year, and just, lots of happenings at school.
Yeah.
So lots of time at the lake over the summer. So yes, I'm pretty grateful for all of the things I also get to experience.
So let's move on and introduce today's interview. Please help me out, Michelle.
Sure, Jeremy. In 1836, rumors of gold in a muddy river near modern-day Green Bay, Wisconsin, spurred the creation of what would become the City of Kewaunee. As the settlement grew, the river was dredged and a large protected harbor was created. In 1880 and 1881, two 500-foot-long piers were built at the entrance to the harbor.
The arrival of a railroad in the late 1800s led to increased shipping in the area. The first lighthouse in the harbor was erected in 1889, and in the years that followed, there were a number of reconfigurations of the piers and lighthouses in the harbor. In late 1930, a car ferry collided with the South Pier and badly damaged a small lighthouse tower that stood adjacent to a fog signal building.
The damaged pier was repaired and a square brick lighthouse tower was built out of the roof of the fog signal building, giving the lighthouse the appearance it has now. The light was automated in 1981, and the City of Kewaunee was granted ownership of the lighthouse in September 2011.
Thanks to the assistance of the nonprofit Friends of the Kewaunee Pierhead Lighthouse, much restoration has been carried out in the past decade. The roof and siding were replaced, and historically accurate doors and windows were installed, among other projects. In 2019, the lighthouse's fifth-order Fresnel lens was decommissioned, and it's now on display at the Kewaunee County Historical Society. Our guest today, Jake Heffernan, is the acting president and historian for the Friends of the Kewaunee Pierhead Lighthouse. I want to give a shout-out to my friend Christine Cardacci, a longtime lighthouse hunter who has photographed just about all the lighthouses in the country. Chris met Jake Heffernan when she was in Kewaunee for a lighthouse tour recently, and she recommended him for an interview, and I'm very glad she did because he was great. So let's listen to my conversation with Jake Heffernan now. I am speaking this afternoon with Jake Heffernan, who is the acting president of the Friends of the Kewaunee Pierhead Lighthouse in Wisconsin. Hi, Jake. Thanks so much for doing this today.
Hi, thanks for having me.
How did you get involved with the Friends group for the lighthouse?
I got involved just before the Fresnel lens came out. I've been involved since about 2018. My big concern after I'd heard that the lens was going to be removed was, has anybody been up there to take pictures of it? And the answer was no. And that surprised me. So I wanted to make sure that the lens was well documented before it came out because we'd never have another opportunity to create those photos again.
Hmm.
So, long story short, I got involved in the city committee in charge of the restoration of the lighthouse. And that allowed me to get access to the lighthouse unescorted with my equipment. And I was able to watch some pretty incredible sunrises and sunsets from the top of the lighthouse
Hmm.
while my cameras rolled.
Do you have, sounds like you have background in photography, filmmaking, video production, all of the above, or?
Not a background, but it's an interest and a hobby, I guess.
Yeah.
I started a documentary about the lighthouses of Door County, Wisconsin, and then COVID hit and everything stopped.
Hmm.
And then I became more active in the actual hands-on restoration, and I
Hmm.
haven't had a chance to revisit the documentary at all.
Yeah.
And now there's been such a time gap that when I do go and revisit, I have to refilm a ton of stuff because there's been a ton of progress made, which is incredible.
Yeah.
But I mean, that makes a daunting task even more daunting. And now
Yeah.
I'm more hands on than ever. So I guess that's a really long answer to that question.
No, that's okay. No, just curious because it sounded like you, are
Yeah.
going about it in a very professional kind of way, and it's so good that you got that footage of the with the lens in place because a lot of that stuff just gets lost to history, and to get it in its natural habitat, it's
Mm,
important. They're great in museums, but they were made to be in the lighthouses, obviously.
right.
So let's get into the history of the lighthouse. Of course, you can't really talk about the history of your lighthouse without talking about the general history of that area, that part of Lake Michigan. So why did people first come to that area?
The Native Americans lived here before there was any kind of European influence. The salmon run upriver every year and spawn, and the Native Americans would fish the river and they would feast on the salmon. In November of 1674, Father Jacques Marquette offered mass at the mouth of the Kewaunee River to that Native American tribe that was there. That was the first recorded event at Kewaunee. The first actual settlement by Europeans was in 1836, and that was driven by a rumor of gold in the
Mm,
river, which is hilarious to think about now because there's just a lot of mud in that river. There's no gold in that river, not even anything that resembles gold in that river, just a lot
hmm.
of mud.
Yeah.
That settlement didn't last long, it kind of fizzled out again. And then sawmill was built, and then that faded because they couldn't get the lumber out. But then once the harbor started developing, a man came in, bought the sawmill, built a pier into the lake, and then he was able to start turning out lumber. And then the town was able to start growing from there. That was 1850. He built that first pier out into Lake Michigan.
Hmm.
And then Kewaunee kind of started developing after that. 2 years later, Kewaunee was organized as a town. And then in 1880, the current river mouth was dredged. Start getting into a more modern era of harbor history.
Yeah. That's when they built two long piers at the entrance to the harbor. Is that correct?
Yeah, they built two 500-foot long wooden piers that stretched out into the lake. Ships could either tie up at them. It was made Kewaunee a harbor of refuge then.
Yeah.
The interior of the harbor was dredged, and you could start getting deeper and deeper ships in there.
As far as the lighthouse or lighthouses go in the harbor area there, it's kind of convoluted. It's you probably have it all straight in your mind. It's a little dizzying to read about it, but why don't we kind of cut to the chase? Can you tell me when the present structure was built? We'll start with that. When was the lighthouse there now built?
The lighthouse that is here now was built in 1912.
Okay, but it went through a lot of changes, right?
Yeah, the lighthouse itself was built as the fog signal building, and then it had a tower in front of it for the light. In 1930, there was a car ferry that was coming in here carrying rail cars, and that ferry hit the end of the pier and destroyed the end of the concrete pier and damaged the one of the corner legs of the light tower.
Hmm.
And the federal government decided that they were going to take that tower away, repair it, and they were going to cut a hole in the roof of the fog signal building and build the tower that we have now out of the roof of the fog signal building. The tower that was in use before that was taken away, fixed, and it now marks the entrance to the Chicago River. That's the Chicago Harbor Southeast Guide Wall Light.
Hmm. Wow. I found there's a lot of Great Lakes lighthouse history, a lot of harbors where there's been, changes in piers and so many lights. And I don't know how anybody keeps it all straight, but you probably have this this all completely organized in your brain.
I'm not
Um,
going to lie. The period in history between the first lighthouse being built in 1889 here
hmm.
and when the current lighthouse was built in 1912, you said it was convoluted. I do, to a certain extent, have it sorted out, but it still does make my head hurt. There
Yeah,
was a
yeah.
lot of
No,
changes in those years.
I completely understand that. Yeah. Let's talk about the human history there, okay? Well, first of all, as you mentioned, it was a fog signal building as well. So you had obviously a light to take care of, but you also had a fog signal, which probably by the time it was built, was it like a compressed air
Yep.
type horn? Yeah.
It was
Yeah.
still a whistle. It was still a 10-inch whistle, but it was compressed air at the time.
Hmm.
Uh, this was the first instance here. We had a 10-inch steam whistle on the other side with the old lighthouse. This one got a brand new 10-inch Crosby chime whistle. Most of the fog whistles were plain single note. This one happened to be three, which was interesting to find out. And it was made by Crosby Steam Gauge and Valve Company.
So you had the light and fog signal. So you had multiple keepers, right? How many keepers would be assigned there?
Two during the lighthouse service days.
Hmm.
And then the logbooks that we have are from the 1960s. And by then, the Coast Guard was staffing the station with four. And then there would be one man on watch at all times, and they just rotate through their watch cycle throughout the day.
And families lived with them as well, or not?
Yes, in the early days before the present lighthouse was built, the keepers didn't get an actual purpose-built house until 1908. So
Hmm.
from 1889 until 1908, the keeper just had to rent a room wherever one was free in town. After that, the duplex was built by the lighthouse service, and that allowed the keeper and the assistant and their families to live there.
Hmm.
Each side, it was a side-by-side duplex, common to the style around that time. There were
Hmm.
a couple other stations in our area that had identical dwellings built in roughly the same era. So
Yeah.
yeah, by the time the 1960s rolled around and there were four living there, I'm not totally sure how they arranged all that, but I know that there were still families living there in the 60s in that house. But I'm not sure what they did with the overflow people because there were
Mm.
only two apartments there.
What stands out in your mind as far as could be interesting personalities among the keepers or incidents that happen there involving the keepers and families?
The one that kind of pops into my mind in those Coast Guard days, their typical watch, it really depended on whether somebody was on leave or not. But usually their watches were 4 hours or 8 hours. And if there were only two guys on station at the time, just for vacation or vacancy, they'd have to do rotating 12-hour watches. But that was it. You'd get some time off. You'd get to go back to shore and kind of reset yourself a little bit after maybe sitting and hearing the foghorn every 30 seconds for 12 hours. There was one November storm in the 1960s where our keeper was stranded out there for 19 hours, foghorn blaring the entire time. And he was supposed to only be out there for 8 that night.
Mm.
And the lighthouse was accessed by a catwalk. And I guess when we think about that, we think, okay, well, they're fine. They don't have to worry about it. They're above the waves and everything. That should be just a fine, it's not going to be comfortable, but it's going to be safe, right? Well, apparently not. He was stuck out there for 19 hours during this awful storm. His logbook said that they had 12-foot waves coming through the piers.
So the water was probably going over the catwalk, basically.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I've said this a number of times on the podcast because we've talked about a lot of Great Lakes lights, but I think coastal people and people who live in other parts of the country away from the Great Lakes And that goes for me too. I'm kind of blown away when to hear about things like that. Just to think about 12-foot waves on Lake Michigan is pretty incredible. And it came home to me when I was out. I haven't been to your area. I need to get there, but I saw some of Lake Superior, the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, and into Minnesota 2 years ago, and saw people surfing near Duluth, Minnesota, which I never thought of that. I mean, yeah, it makes sense, but it really amazed me. So they're inland oceans, really,
Yeah, they
S-
are.
except no saltwater smell. That to me
Right.
that's how you know you're not at the ocean. The smell is totally different.
The smell is definitely different. I visited the East Coast for the first time this summer, and the smell is definitely different.
Where'd you go?
Whitehead Island.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I know it well. I've spent several times spent a few days out there in stretches. They had me go out and lecture about New England lighthouses, and what a great place. I love that.
That was an incredible visit. I spent
Yeah,
3 nights on the island. That was awesome.
good for you. Yeah, oh, it's a real special place. Back to Kewaunee Pierhead Lighthouse. The light was automated in 1981, and some changes happened at that time. What happened when the light was automated?
The interior was absolutely gutted. Everything that could move was removed, down to the light fixtures. We basically have an empty shell, which is okay because that means we don't have a bunch of garbage that needs to go out. A bunch of old office supplies or anything like that. It's all gone. The only things that we have left are the two large air tanks at the base of the tower and then two fuel oil tanks in the basement. And those are just more or less encapsulated in there and they'll never come out.
Was it then or was it later? The ownership of the station actually went to the city of Kewaunee, right?
That didn't happen until 2011.
Okay, much later. Yeah.
Yeah, much later. The Coast Guard maintained that ownership throughout that period. Then it came up as excess property. First step in that process is government entities and nonprofits submit their interest, and
Yep.
only two organizations submitted their interest, and it was the City of Kewaunee and PETA. And City of Kewaunee was selected to receive the lighthouse, and that happened in September of 2011.
So through the National Historic Lighthouse Preservation Act, which has turned over many lighthouse properties to nonprofits and communities and so forth. So tell me about the Friends of the Kewaunee Pierhead Lighthouse. How did the organization form and what do you do?
Well, when a government entity owns a building like the lighthouse, in order to raise money for the restoration, you need to partner with a nonprofit. So that's what the nonprofit was created to do, was to be able to accept donations and fundraise on behalf of the restoration of the lighthouse. We drive for donations and we sell merchandise, we provide tours, and then we do basically all the cheerleading behind the scenes for for the actual brick and mortar restoration that's handled more on the city side.
Yeah, it's pretty common type of partnership. See it at a
Yes.
lot of places. Yeah, definitely few here in New England for sure. So you mentioned it earlier about the fifth order Fresnel lens that was in place in the lighthouse. Had been there for more than 100 years, but it was removed in 2019 or 2018 or 2019. Was it
2019, yes.
2019? Yeah. Where did the lens go? Where is it now?
The lens went downtown Kewaunee at the Kewaunee County Historical Society's History Center. It's their building that it's somewhat of a museum and record archive. And there's a replica, smaller scale replica lantern room built in there. And the lens sits in the middle, lit up, and the public can go see it whenever the Historical Society's open.
That sounds nice.
Yeah,
And I think you'd agree. Again, it's always nice to have those old Fresnel lenses in their natural habitat, but the next best thing is a nice museum display like that. And of course, a lot more people are going to see it in the museum than see it in the lighthouse. So there's pluses and minuses both ways.
I
But
agree.
that's yeah,
Yeah.
but that's nice. It sounds like it's well preserved.
It's
Uh,
nice that we were able to maintain it here. The other lens that was removed on the same day was Algoma, which is 10 miles north of Kewaunee.
mhm,
And the Algoma lens, nobody in Algoma went through the process to keep the lens in town. And North Point Lighthouse in Milwaukee ended up with that lens. So it
mhm.
was really special that we were able to keep it in town.
Yeah, yeah. And the light is still an active aid to navigation, right?
Correct. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's lit
and
by a modern
mhm.
LED light.
Some people don't think they're exactly as romantic as the old Fresnel lenses, or even some lighthouses had the rotating arrow beacons that still had like a sweep on the water. The LEDs are more like blink, blink, or whatever, but they do the job for a lot less money. So that's the
I
positive
definitely
part.
prefer the sweep across the water. There's something special about that.
Yeah,
Sturgeon Bay Canal Light has its rotating third order Fresnel lens still in active aid to navigation, and that is an incredible thing to be able to see.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. There's nothing like it, and I think a lot of us miss those old warm sweeping lights, the more yellowish type of light rather than the cold blue of the LED. But again,
Absolutely.
there's can't blame the Coast Guard. They're out to have the most efficient light for the least amount of money.
Yep.
So it makes a lot of sense. So I know a lot of restoration has been accomplished at the lighthouse in recent years. It looks like there's been a bunch of projects, and we probably don't have time to go over everything in detail. But what are some of the highlights of what's been accomplished there in the last few years?
Well, the big project was 2017. That was the upper two-thirds of the lighthouse, kind of sealing out the weather. New roof, new metal roof. The cladding on the side of the tower and the side of the second floor was replaced with something more period accurate. It was a
Hmm.
corrugated metal before, and now it's got more of the look of the asbestos tile. The second floor windows were uncovered at that time, let more light in, and then they were covered with storms until we're able to actually restore them on the inside. The first floor windows were done a couple years ago. Those were replaced with replicas, all 10 windows in the machinery space. And then we've been having issues with water intrusion on that first floor. So we had a metal belt that goes around the entire perimeter to cover the gap between the metal sheeting on the side and the concrete foundation. And
Hmm.
that seals out the wave action as it comes up and hits the side of the lighthouse. And then this year, in addition to that belt, we also had that first floor metal sheeting painted. So now the lighthouse really shines, really pops.
Yeah, it
There's
looks
a really
gorgeous
yes, it
in
does.
pictures. Yeah.
Really beautiful contrast between that bright red metal roof and that bright white paint on that first floor.
Yeah, no, it looks like pristine in the pictures I've seen. So, how easy is it to get there? Is the walk on the breakwater? I shouldn't say breakwater. The pier is not that long, right? How long a walk is it?
No, it's not very long at all. It's only a quarter mile out there. It looks closer than it actually is. People are surprised to know that it is a quarter mile. It looks a lot closer, but it
Hmm.
is only a quarter mile.
Yeah. And when there's not restoration work going on, how does it work? Are there periodic tours, periodic days when the lighthouse is open?
Usually, the last few years, it totals out to be about 6 Saturdays a summer that will be able to open up from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. for tours.
Hmm.
Dates usually correspond with the Door County Maritime Museum's Lighthouse Festival. And then in July, they correspond to some of the more local events that we have. There's a car show that happens downtown, and then our annual class reunion that's open to everybody,
Hmm.
open for that as well.
And are the tours run by volunteers?
Exclusively, yeah. Everything we do is 100% volunteer based. There's
Hmm.
no paid staff here.
I would imagine, like any small nonprofit organization, you're probably always in the market for new volunteers.
Always, yeah. I think I
Hmm.
think everybody would love some volunteers.
Yeah,
We have a
it's
core
tough these
group.
days. Yeah,
It is, yeah. This year
yeah.
seems to be worse than most in the past. I think for a lot of nonprofits to get volunteers, they just seem to be fewer and further between these last couple years.
The pandemic, I think, can be blamed for a lot of that. It just seems like
Sure.
things changed. A lot of people, I think, kind of dropped out of the volunteer world at that time and haven't really come back. So, yeah, no, it's a universal problem for
Yeah,
organizations. So, but if any, you never know who might be listening. If there's somebody in your area, I'm sure they can get in contact easily through the website. There must be
absolutely. Yeah, just reach out. There's all sorts of ways to get in touch with us.
one thing I was reading, I believe it was on the organization's website, is that the lighthouse in Holland, Michigan, that's quite well known. People know it as Big Red for obvious reasons. It's
Yeah.
kind of fire engine red. It's considered a sister light of Kewaunee Pierhead. Is that correct?
Yeah, it is. Simply, they look very similar.
Yeah.
Kewaunee is white, Holland is red. For a lot of Holland's history, Holland was also white, but now it is very well known as Big Red. And there was actually a third sister lighthouse that was built in Waukegan, just north of Chicago, but that lighthouse burned on June 1st, 1967, and the fog signal building was demolished. How they ended up being kind of looking alike, I can't really tell the reason behind it because they weren't necessarily all built around the same time. Waukegan and Holland were both built as towers only first.
Mm-hmm.
Waukegan has a circle tower, and Holland had that detached square one. Waukegan had its fog signal building built in 1906. Holland got it in 1907, and then Kewaunee was both built together in 1912. Kewaunee's tower was integrated in 1931. Holland's was integrated in 1936. I can imagine that they integrated Holland's tower because they saw that it just made sense after integrating Kewaunee's. Waukegan's tower was already partially embedded in the side of the fog signal building, so I guess they didn't really have to do anything there. It's just interesting to see the similarities and the differences between these two or three lighthouses.
Mm-hmm.
Last year, I was able to go through Holland, and it was absolutely awesome to go through and see and hear what the differences between the two lighthouses were. The fact
Yeah.
that Holland used to actually generate steam for the whistle, we didn't. The second floor under the current tower that used to be open to the boiler below. So it was just a catwalk that took you over that open space. So that was cool to stand there and imagine how that would have been different or how that could have been implemented in Kewaunee had they gone a different direction with things. And it helped me somewhat understand a little bit more about the structure of the building itself. I was able to look a little deeper at namely the foundation of
Mm-hmm.
Holland. That's what I was most concerned with. That's what I'm tossing back and forth with here in Kewaunee, water intrusion stuff. So
Mm-hmm.
it was just really cool to be able to see the similarities and the differences between the two.
Yeah, yeah. You've written a lot about this kind of stuff there's a blog on the website, right? Is that
Yes.
is that all you that blog or
Yep.
most? Yeah, it is. Yeah,
Yep. That's
yeah.
all
Okay.
me.
So I'm sure there's many ways people can donate to the upkeep of Kewaunee Pierhead Lighthouse. For one thing, I saw you have a commemorative paver bricks program. Is that right?
Yes, we do. We
Hmm.
have a small park that's located right at the base of the pier that the lighthouse is on. In that park, we have a little corner set aside for these paver bricks. And we have three sizes to choose from, and you can customize the text on them, and we'll install them. And your donation and your support of the lighthouse is permanently memorialized right there within view of the lighthouse.
Good. That sounds like a great program. So, is there information on the website about how people can donate otherwise?
Absolutely. We
Yeah.
have different ways that you can donate, whether it be directly via the website or PayPal or Venmo, or if you want to purchase a paper brick, you can do all that stuff via the website,
Sure.
KewauneePierheadLighthouse.org.
All right. What can you tell me about Kewaunee Lighthouse white wine? I found that intriguing.
I can tell you that it is the second most popular wine that this winery has sold in the last year, and it's so popular that they sold out.
Wow.
We teamed up, we, the nonprofit, teamed up with a local winery, Cold Country, to create this lighthouse wine. And the idea was that we create a wine that both celebrates the history of the lighthouse while also contributing to its future. Cold Country decided that we would get $2 from every bottle sold.
Hmm.
So we had a local artist paint the cover art, and then a group of us from the nonprofit sat down with Cold Country and created a new wine, somewhat blending a few of their most popular wines together,
Hmm.
and came out with this lighthouse wine last year. And over the last year, it has sold out. I have one bottle left,
That's great.
saving it for a special occasion.
I was gonna say saving it for Christmas time maybe or something.
Something.
Yeah. So it's just like the wine the keepers used to drink, right?
I think Probably a little bit less like coffee tasting.
Keepers were, in theory, not drinking a lot of wine or anything like that, but
Theory.
I do know of a lighthouse where a bottle was found plastered over inside a wall when it was being restored with a note. They were actually, the civilian keepers were celebrating or sort of anti-celebrating the fact that the Coast Guard was taking over management of lighthouses. So they had a little private party and stashed the bottle in the wall. So just a little aside there.
Nice little
Uh,
time capsule. That's cool though.
so I have two final questions for you, okay? And these are for bonus points. Okay, the next to last question is why should Kewaunee Pierhead Lighthouse be preserved?
This is a really unique example of a Great Lakes pier lighthouse that's been kind of dressed up a little bit. It's got kind of the look of your standard, pier lighthouse, but with a little flair to it. And it's unique enough that it's just us and Holland left with that little extra flair. It's in relatively good shape and it's very easily accessed by the public. As beautiful as Holland is, in its current state right now, it's not publicly accessible,
Mhm.
which is the unfortunate drawback. We are publicly accessible. I think we should all be preserved, but I'm also a little bit more realistic and understand that you can't do it all.
That's true. So I have that one final question for you, but let me squeeze another question in here. Just yesterday, I saw one of these a drone video. I can't think of which pier. It wasn't yours, but another pierhead lighthouse somewhere in the Great Lakes, with it looks like an ice castle with completely covered with ice and icicles hanging down and everything. Which I'm sure a lot of our listeners have seen that with a lot of the pier lights in the Great Lakes. Do you get that at all? Does it get covered in ice sometimes?
Never.
No.
We aren't facing the prevailing winds that way.
Okay.
The lighthouse that you would have seen is going to be on the Michigan shore
Mm-hmm.
facing us. So the wind comes out of the northwest and just pounds that shoreline, but we are protected from that by our own shoreline here. The storms that come from the northeast, we are protected by a large breakwater on the north side, so we don't get that kind of wave action. We
Okay.
do get some wave action from the southeast, but all that really does is build up a little bit of an iceberg behind the back door.
Okay. I was just curious, having just seen some of that. It's all foreign to us on the East Coast. We get obviously tremendously bad coastal storms, but with the salt water, the ice doesn't form or
Right.
stay for any length of time like it does with the fresh water. So, final question for bonus points is, what is your favorite thing about things about your involvement with Kewaunee Pierhead Lighthouse?
I think overall it's got to be sharing the history. I can talk for hours, just ramble on and on and on about the history. And as long as people are still bright eyed and excited about it, I can keep talking about it. There are so many different aspects to each one of these lighthouses' histories. No matter what you focus on, you can dive down a rabbit hole and just keep digging and digging and digging. Whether you
Hmm.
dig in on the people, whether you dig in on the technology, whether you dig in on the architectural changes through time, there's always something that you can focus on, and there's always more information that you could potentially uncover. And sharing that with people and seeing their eyes light up when they hear something that they didn't know and that they think is really cool is
Hmm.
a big reason why I do this.
That's great. And that made me think I got to give a heads up to Chris Cardacci, who actually emailed me and said, you've got to interview this guy, Jake Heffernan, because I don't know if you remember her being there. She's one of the people who's photographed just about every lighthouse in the United States.
Yep.
And she visited you and said you gave a great tour and that I should contact you. So Chris, thanks so much.
Thank
Uh,
you, Chris.
yeah, that's the kind of thing that people will remember. When the people visit a lighthouse, it's like an added bonus to have somebody like you who's so knowledgeable, who kind of brings it more to life for them. It's important.
It is important because without that extra step, we're not going to keep people interested in this stuff in the future. You have to reach out and grab somebody and bring them in. They're not going to walk up to you.
Yeah, beautifully said. So before we close up shop here, a little birdie told me something about like a mobile exhibit you have related to to fog signals. So what's that all about?
So one of the big challenges is getting people excited and really interacting with them, because it's, aside from touring a lighthouse, it's tough to interact with a lighthouse. So what I've done is I've created somewhat of an evolution of fog signals technology exhibit. And what it consists of is of a small cannon that I use to demonstrate the first fog signal in the United States. And then I have a couple air tanks and a gas powered air compressor. And I have a steam whistle that I blow on compressed air. And then I have a small Type B diaphone, which is the smallest available diaphone that's made. That's the old foghorn that a lot of people are probably familiar with,
Hmm.
just on a lot smaller scale. So what I'm able to do with this is I'm able to show people how technology changed over time, and they're able to hear that change over time themselves, just in the power of the sound that they experience. Because a cannon is a single percussive bang, and then you have a whistle, which, yes, it's loud, but it's not powerful. And then you hear the diaphone, which is small and it packs an incredible punch for the size that it has. And
Hmm.
people are really surprised. So then I say, okay, now imagine that on this much bigger scale. And they engage with that a lot more than if I just stand there and shoot off a PowerPoint presentation. It's a lot more exciting, and they take a lot more away from that
Hmm.
when they experience that sound themselves.
Yes, I love that. I really, really love that. And you're right. Finding a way to bring it, really, literally bring it to life like that is so important. It's it's one thing to read about it in a scholarly journal or something, but to see and hear it, yeah, that is great.
And I can't
And
bring a 500-pound diaphone foghorn around. I mean, I could.
yeah,
I'd need a lot of probably funding to do it, but I could do it. But that's not nearly as realistic as this is.
yeah. Oh, it's great. So it sounds like you're into sort of building stuff yourself too.
Not really. I learned pneumatics because I had to. Stuff I had to learn, I guess. I don't know.
Well, good for you. I think that I really love that. I really, really do. So I think a lot of these things we're talking about are to be continued, Jake. So
I
it's
think so.
great meeting you, great making contact with you and talking today. And again, this definitely will continue. So thanks so much for your time today, Jake.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been amazing talking to you.
You can learn more at Kewaunee That's KEWAUNEE Pierheadlighthouse.org. There's tour information and also information about how you can donate or volunteer. As you heard in the interview, you can also buy a special engraved paver brick to help support the preservation of the lighthouse.
Big thanks again to Jake Heffernan. He was great to talk to. I know we'll have him back on the podcast. Michelle, I want to mention some exciting things that have been happening at the lighthouse we know and love here on the New Hampshire seacoast, of course, Portsmouth Harbor Lighthouse.
That's right. A lot of work has been done lately to stabilize the base of the lighthouse and also the brick oil house after all the storm damage we've had in the past couple of years.
Yeah, so again, we're speaking on December 23rd, and it was exactly 2 years ago today that a storm with a very high tide washed away the 80-foot-long footbridge that led out to the lighthouse. I'm sure you remember that like it was yesterday.
I do. I will not forget getting those pictures from the Coast Guard showing that there was no longer a walkway. Or, well, a big portion of it was gone,
Yeah.
just floated away. So
Yeah, I'll never forget 2 years ago. The day before that storm, I was in the hospital getting a foot operation. And on December 23rd, I was at home on the couch with my foot elevated. And I see a text come in from our Coast Guard contact at Coast Guard Station Portsmouth Harbor, where the lighthouse is. And it's showing the flooding in the area near the lighthouse and big waves hitting the seawall and so forth. And as it pans over to the lighthouse, I thought there's something missing in this picture. And there sure was, because that footbridge was, again, largely washed out by that storm. And then this past January, almost a year ago, we had 2 back-to-back storms that coincided with very high king tides. Did a lot of damage to the base of the lighthouse and the little brick oil house that stands a couple of 100 feet away. The damage was pretty scary.
It really was. Being there right after, as the storm was starting to subside a little bit, and seeing the damage firsthand to the lighthouse. At that time, when I was there right after the storm, I couldn't see the damage to the oil house because the tide was still too high and the waves were still really big coming in. So I didn't have the opportunity to, see the damage to the oil house. But, seeing that damage to the base of the lighthouse, it made me actually very emotional in that moment. So
just a little more background. Our local group here, Friends of Portsmouth Harbor Lighthouses, is a chapter of the American Lighthouse Foundation, which is, of course, a separate organization from the U.S. Lighthouse Society. I know it can get a little confusing for people. You are the chairperson for the chapter, Michelle, so you've been in the middle of all this. And our friend Bob Trapani, the executive director of the American Lighthouse Foundation, has helped to coordinate all this work.
And Bob, I can't even say enough. He's just been amazing through all of this. Because there's a whole side to this whole process of getting things repaired and things like that I don't have any experience with. So to have Bob, doing that part of it has been just a blessing.
Yeah, well, we've seen some of the work up close and personal, and also in photos from Bob Trapani and Jim Leslie, and it looks great.
The work got started, late in the season because we've been waiting for approvals, but the contractor, Jim Leslie, has finished most of the stabilization work. And actually, as we speak, he and his crew will be pouring concrete to shore up the base of the lighthouse any day now.
Hopefully this work will get the lighthouse through the storms of this upcoming winter in good shape.
Right. And then we'll be looking at a more permanent restoration, maybe even moving the lighthouse to safer ground. We'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, I think everything has to be on the table. We may have to consider moving the lighthouse. We'd love to have tours again, but with the footbridge gone, we have to figure out how to get people safely out to the lighthouse.
I don't mean to throw a pun in here, Jeremy, but I'm going to say we'll cross that bridge when we come to it.
Well, yeah, that's pretty punny, Michelle, but I like it. I like a good pun. So, any plans for New Year's Eve?
I think my daughter and our plans, we're going to watch Dick Clark's New Year's Rocking Eve.
Ooh.
Because she's very excited because the Jonas Brothers are performing and we'll be announcing their 2025 tour. So that's going to be the highlight of my New Year's Eve, but I'm fine with that. How about you, Jeremy?
Well, mostly I'm just thankful I made it through another year, really. And for me, I think this New Year's Eve will just be a time to reflect on the good, mostly good in this past year, and think about how we can all make the upcoming year a good one, make it as good as we possibly can. So it's going to be quiet for me, but just basically a time to reflect. So we will be back in 2 weeks with the first of a 2-part interview with Peter Hallill, a former lighthouse keeper in England who's done a lot to preserve the history of lighthouse keepers in the UK. Until then, to all our regular listeners and our new ones, thanks so much for listening. A very happy New Year, and
keep a good light.
I'm gonna let it shine all in my house. I'm gonna let it shine, let it shine, let it shine.